Speaking of people doing just fine during this economy, and not to be too New York centric, but I do want to hit this, and you reminded me with your discussion right there, Jamie. Andrew Cuomo, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's been heralded as a hero during the coronavirus pandemic. You know, New York only was the hardest hit state and still the state with the most overall deaths in the United States. But, you know, hero Andrew Cuomo saved New York apparently all on his own, really, if you want to believe how some people talk about him. Andrew Cuomo has been out there, obviously, talking about New York's in trouble when it comes to the economy. Tax revenue obviously is down. Tourism is big in New York. Not right now, though. No one's coming to New York to visit. And so New York needs to find a way to make some money. So a few days ago, Andrew Cuomo, in one of his daily briefings, said that if Washington doesn't come through with the stimulus, that they're going to have to raise revenue some ways. And one of those ways is that the people of New York will have to pay higher fares for the public transportation, including higher tolls, you know, the subways, the buses, all that fun stuff that the majority of working people in New York rely on to get to work. I mean, even during the pandemic, if you're not someone lucky enough to work from home, you are taking public transportation right now. And really, I mean, you're taking a risk. And so fast forward to yesterday, you know, a lot of people have been talking about the obvious way to make money off to raise revenue for the state is to raise taxes on billionaires. New York has, I believe, 118 billionaires. A few of those actually just became New York billionaires during the pandemic. So you have people
off
who
with
are
their heads.
Right. So Zach Fink of New York One, was at Cuomo's briefing yesterday and asked him, you know, what about raising taxes on New York's highest earners? And Cuomo said to him, we can't do that. The numbers are too large, as in the money to make up for it's too large. And that if we tax billionaires in New York State, you'd have no billionaires left. Now, this could be taken as one of two ways, maybe both. I don't know how Cuomo meant it. He could have meant that if we tax them too much, we'll take too much of their revenue and they will no longer be billionaires. They'll only be pity them 100 millionaires. And this is probably how he meant it, they'll just leave New York State. You know, this is ridiculous because you never hear Cuomo argue with this line of thinking when it comes to the rest of New York citizens who aren't millionaires and billionaires. You never hear the governor of New York say, you know, if we keep raising these public transportation fares, and then the overall cost of living in New York continues to go up, and you know, employers aren't paying their employees more money, then you know, eventually the working class are going to be forced out of the state and have to move somewhere that's, you know, where rents are lower, where the cost of living isn't so high. You never hear that as a concern. He's not worried about raising the fares for millions of New Yorkers who rely on public transportation, but 118 billionaires, God forbid. God forbid. And, you know, let's say we take like, what is it? I believe, where was it? I have this in front of me. Monica Klein, another New York reporter, pointed out that, I'm sorry, she's not a reporter, but she pointed out that during the Great Depression, the New York governor raised taxes on wealthy by 2%. During the 1961 recession, the governor raised taxes on the wealthy by 4.9%. And during the 2009 financial crisis, New York Governor Patterson raised taxes on the wealthy, not much, but 1.1%, which again, better than nothing. And, you know, if we were to raise taxes on them just a little bit, let's say, I don't know, I don't even know how much to raise them. If we were to tax them just a little bit, let's say Michael Bloomberg, whose wealth is at $58.5 billion. Let's say we raised his taxes and we took, I don't know, who knows how much? Someone throw me a number.
I don't know. Not good with math.
Well, let's say we took half of that. He would still be a billionaire, and we would never take half of that because no one's suggesting we take half of that. 58.5 billion cut in half is what?
I think we could take half of that. I'll seriously suggest we take half of that.
Right. And by the way, his that 58.5 billion number is a 10.5 billion increase since March 18th of this year. So another guy who's made money off during the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, to some of your points, I think it will be very hard for a lot of working class people to pack up and move if it were to come to that, because moving is expensive and the rent is too damn high in New York, but it's going up everywhere. And people are finding that they have fewer and fewer places to go. The poor and working classes have already been pushed out to the very edges of the city. So they're in a pretty tight spot. Also, the fear of a capital strike is somewhat real, right? Like, you raise taxes too much on the billionaires and the business interests, or say, I don't know, on a grander scale, try to implement some kind of social democratic welfare state in your country, they will flee. They will use soft power and hard power when necessary to try to overthrow the policymakers who are doing that to them. That doesn't mean that it's not a valuable project, however, and that doesn't mean that we cannot fight to raise taxes on the ruling class at the same time that we're also engaged in the longer term struggle to overthrow the capitalist system that makes their capital strike possible in the first place.
Well, I don't know. I think, made a lot of good points, but I do think that, especially during the pandemic, and I think a lot of companies are looking at, hey, we could save a lot of money now because we're seeing that the work from home model, the telecommuting model, works for some of us. And not everyone who's working from home is, making a lot of money. There's a number of people who work from home and are able to work from home and, and they're working class. Hello, guys. How you doing? And, what if you could move somewhere where you can go from your studio apartment or one bedroom where you're paying, I don't know, $1,500 to $2,000 in New York City for? You could, if you have a family, especially if you have kids, you could move somewhere a little further away, still do the same job, less than $1,000 for 2 to 3 bedroom I've seen. I mean, it's probably gone up from, the 400. I mean, I would love to, but New York is. It would need to be. It need to be some. It's definitely, as you can tell, it's come as the thought, but it would be hard for us specifically. But for other people, if you don't have family in New York, like if you're someone who moved from somewhere else to come to New York to live the New York life, like I'm a New Yorker born and raised, so I have family here. It's a little bit hard, but if you're someone who came from another state to move to New York and live the New York life, and you met someone and raised a family here, all of a sudden this all goes down and money's tight, pandemic's going on, and you got family somewhere else. It doesn't look so bad to save some money, get more space, and move the family back to where you were raised, Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I've been feeling like all of our rent should be reduced right now because we can't go anywhere. And why do you want to pay to live in New York if you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything and your job's not tethered to it anymore? So why? I don't know. I really still like being around my friends. I will probably die in this town, but I could see it from both sides. I'm also concerned that the kind of, shall we say, remote worker flight that you're talking about will serve to open up the chasm even bigger between the, say, averagely employed worker and the unemployed or underemployed member of the working class. And the cities are just going to be these weird islands of, even less equal than they are right now, right? It's literally just going to be a place for millionaires and billionaires from all over the world to park their capital in these buildings that they don't even live in, on the one hand, and on the other hand, just a completely immiserated underclass of people who are serving them.
The first thing that needs to be done in New York State, and it's ridiculous we don't have it here, and it's clearly one of, if not the most glaring problem, and it hits a number of different issues. One is just how, the income inequality in the state specifically, and in New York City specifically, with the very, very wealthy, and it also hits the housing crisis situation here, there's not enough housing. There needs to be a vacancy tax. So simple. It's
yes.
you will find no New Yorker who disagrees with that, except for maybe those 118 billionaires and some of the very rich millionaires. A vacancy tax would go so far. You have so much vacant space in this city because, and people might not know this if you're not a New Yorker and are familiar with local or state politics, millionaires and billionaires come to New York, they buy up property, and instead of renting it, they just let it sit vacant because they can't find any renters for the amount they want to rent it to. And because they're not really worried about the mortgage, it's not like they need a renter to cover their mortgage, like maybe some smaller landlords need. They just let it sit there and you have a perfectly good space. Like it could be multiple bedrooms, giant houses, like a giant property, just sitting there, not a single person. Maybe that billionaire will show up for a vacation 2 weeks out of the year, 2 weeks out of every 52,
Well, yeah, we have such a weird, a few things going on in real estate, which is that like the corporate business real estate, that market's wiped out because of all this work from home stuff, right? And then you also have all these McMansions and giant houses that the boomers have been making that are valued at prices that nobody from our generation is going to be able to pick up the slack on. And basically it's going to come down to the banks to buy up all this crap in the long run. So yeah, like a vacancy tax to make we need to break up the banks too, ultimately. I really like the idea of a vacancy tax because it's obscene. New York, I before I moved to New York, I hadn't really seen a lot of homelessness. I lived in London for a summer, and there was some there, but not like you have here. And then there's also all this space being advertised. Like, look at how empty this business for rent, right? And they have the lights on, and or any kind of like bank lobby, just this massive amount of space closed for the night. Meanwhile, 8 homeless people are freezing their ass off outside.
Right. Cool system.
Yeah, just absolutely ridiculous.
There's about to be a whole lot more because there's a wave of evictions coming. Housing courts are being reopened. And, but the Democrats passed a bill to maybe help you pay for your lawyer in housing court if you, meet certain very specific means tested requirements.
Yeah. Now you can write off your second ice cream fridge. Thanks.
Like even like Matt mentioned there with even like some of the business, the retail vacancies in New York, you will find like a popular, even like a small chain, like even like a sandwich shop. There's a few locations around the country. You'll find them kicked out of their space when they were serving a location with food, whether people who traveled there to work or in a place where people live. You'll see a landlord literally kick that business out of their location and let it sit vacant for a couple of months because they know with it being available on the market, they could probably pick up a bank or something to take it for like 3 times what they were getting from that sandwich shop and make more money. And it would be worth it. And it's worth it to them to have it sit vacant for a few months for that reason. It's ridiculous. It serves nothing. And who needs another bank in New York City? Really, there's one on every corner.
Yeah. The best answer to this right now is that tenants need to get organized, right? I just spoke with someone from tenants and neighborhood councils out of the East Bay, and a lot of DSA people are involved with that. It's a really cool project. You know what? I'm going to tweet some resources. I'm going to tweet some tenant organizing resources right today after we stop the show, because that's how important I think it is. The housing crisis, if you want to zoom out a little bit, is largely overdetermined, if I can use the O word, by the development of capitalism, right? This ultra financialized neoliberal era that we transitioned into as a result of the 1970s crisis of profitability. Capital needed a new place to go. Factories that made stuff not profitable anymore. So it turned to the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate. This is part of the natural development of capitalism. And in order to really fix the problems, we got to overcome it. However, there are lots and lots and lots of things that we can do to fight back right here and now, including the vacancy tax you guys are talking about, including forming a tenant union.
Right, I would also like to shout out these protesters in New Orleans who are This is Michael Isaac Stein from covering City Hall for the Lens, New Orleans. Demonstrators protesting evictions have blocked off both entrances to First City Court, which handles evictions on the East Bank for rents less than $3,000. That is what you call good targeting, folks. Great job to everybody there.
Hell yeah. You got to show up for each other. I also saw some rallies designed to protect people from evictions right here in Brooklyn. So it's always good to see that kind of solidarity.
Gum up the works.
I've been thinking about what Matt mentioned earlier, what Lek mentioned earlier, a lot actually, in terms of what happens when the boomers are gone, and like to housing and property. I mean, it's literally, to me, like, you want to like the most realistic dystopian future. Like, that is going to be the dystopian like novel. If you want to see real, who is going to afford the housing when millennials and even like younger Gen Xers become the age of the older Gen Xers and boomers? I mean, they're not. What's going to happen to all the housing? And it's something that's stuck on my mind. And like, it's going to be that is the Hunger Games. You know, you don't want to talk about like when Trump became president, and everyone's talking about like, oh, Hayden's Tale and Hunger Games. You know, some aspects, yes, but that's going to be the real. To me, that's when you're going to really see just how bad it can get, I think.
I mean, housing is an important aspect of intergenerational wealth, and that's one of the major reasons for the wealth gap between white people and everyone who's not white in this country. I think a certain proportion of millennials who grew up with a certain degree of comfort, even if they're downwardly mobile, they stand to inherit a significant amount of wealth, assuming their parents' money isn't completely eaten up by end-of-life costs in the absence of any kind of single-payer healthcare system that provides for long-term care, right? But I think all but the wealthiest, say 20% of millennials, are really going to be effed in the housing department.
Think about the world we would live in if healthcare and housing were fully covered. Think about the art that would be created. Think about the inventions. Think about the technological advances. If people were able to just go out and really, because those are the most expensive monthly costs that most people have, healthcare and housing. Without that, I would say the majority of people could scrounge up a couple of bucks, even from working odds and ends jobs, to basically cover other basic necessities. Like, obviously there are food issues as well, but I think, if you would cover healthcare and housing, a lot of the food issue would go away too, because people would have a lot more money freed up for food. I mean, housing, again, you're talking about, in a lot of parts of I'd say the majority of this country, at least $1,000. Obviously, many places even more, just out the door to housing. And when you think about what like the median income is across the United States, that's close to half, if not half, of most people's income.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be this way, folks. Housing is such a good example of the irrationality of a system that produces objects, right? Human needs like food and shelter, not for their use value to humanity, but for the amount of money that they can make on the market. And it's just a very stark reminder of that whenever you see homeless people outside of a totally empty skyscraper.
Yeah, the real estate industry doesn't exist to house people. It exists to exclude people from housing that's already built that they could just go live in.
That's right.